Welcome back, Chillhammer Gang. We're going to be painting a new miniature today. Today we'll be looking at the Warhammer Quest Pit Fighter from 1995. Well, more like 1997 actually. I think he gets released about a couple of years after Warhammer Quest has been out. And this guy is a real favorite with many parties, right? Because this guy not only dishes out a heap of punishment, he's also got a load of really interesting uh, damage, tricks and skills, as well as a really unique rule set for how to use his various abilities and so on. So we're gonna just dive right in. We're gonna start with our usual flesh mix of Guilliman Flesh and Seraphim Sepia. This goes all over his skin, and I'll be able to tell you a little bit more about how this guy works as we go. Okay, so let's just jump right in and block in his skin. So the Pit Fighter is an amazing character, right? He's really interesting conceptually because I don't think in any other part of the Warhammer world do you get to see this particular aspect of human society. No doubt, a lot of the rule books, a lot of the Warhammer armies books talk a lot about the various kinds of dregs of society, operating within the Empire and the old world at large. And what you do get to see very often is just how people who are a little bit down on their luck survive and make their way through the world. And no doubt this happens, right, just as it does in real life, our world, in the Warhammer world. Likewise, you have people who get sold into slavery, unfortunately, who, basically risk their life and limb in order to earn a bit of coin. And the Pit Fighter falls neatly into that category. So it's an unexplored, section of the Warhammer world that you don't get to see once, if you happen to be sticking within the Warhammer armies books, right? So Pit Fighters, right? They are quite an amazing character. They've got really unique damage dealing as well as damage taking options. They behave kind of uniquely from any other character within Warhammer Quest. And although they are slightly clunky to play, I think there are a lot of like fun to get into all the various like specific upgrades and so on. Starting with his weapons. So as you can see, he seems to be armed with a pit flail on the left side, right? That's this giant, like, swingy morning star looking weapon with two balls of spikes. And on the right side, he's got his pit spike. So the pit flail and the pit spike, you have to choose which one you want to use in every round of combat. And they both confer various advantages and disadvantages. The pit flail basically gives him a net +2 strength, and that really determines how much damage he deals out. So he's doing d6 +5 damage, which is quite a bit of damage, all things considered. And this is at battle level 1, right? So basically, even at this starting level, he's already doing a d6 damage to an ogre, for example, which is toughness 5. In Warhammer Quest, what you do is you take d6 plus your strength, and then you subtract the target's armor and toughness stat combined. In the case of ogres, this is 5. So d6 +5 -5 means you're basically dealing d6 damage to an ogre. And ogres are fairly tough already, right? Most of your opponents at battle level 1 will be toughness 3 or toughness 4 at most. So you are doing quite a sizable amount of damage right from the get go. The downside is that if you roll a 1, you're going to clonk yourself right in the face. That's right, you actually do damage to yourself, and not only that, your opponent doesn't take a lick of damage as well. So that turns that single attack into something that is counterproductive rather than actually helping you win combats or taking down your various foes. So that's not great, right? The fist spike is interesting. The fist spike gives you an additional 2 more attacks when you use it. In addition, you may not use your death blow ability, so you only ever kill 1 enemy with it. But +2 attacks is huge. That means at level 1 he basically does like 3 attacks, which is something that you would see on a level 3 or 4, actually level 4 or 5 character. And that makes him really, really impressive. But this whole damage dealing aspect of this character is kind of offset by the way he takes damage in a unique way. As you can see, he's practically naked, which is already highly questionable for walking into a dungeon or stepping into an arena somewhere. So this is an interesting choice, like on the surface. But when it comes to actually taking damage, you need to take note of what the enemy rolls. So for example, you get hit by an orc and the orc rolls like a 5, that means the blow has landed on your chest. So specifically, any armor on your chest gets to contribute to mitigating that damage. If he rolls any other number other than a 5 or a 6, it's going to land on another part of your body, and that part of your body may not be armored. So yeah, that's right. That basically means he needs to armor up his entire body, and every piece of armor costs gold. Not only that, he needs to watch the enemy dice like a hawk to know exactly which part of his body is being hit, which can make it a little bit clunky and confusing at times. So overall, it's an interesting design, interesting concept, and utterly unique in Warhammer Quest. But the downside is that there is a little bit more bookkeeping to follow up on. Now the upshot is you do get something quite cool that gets integrated into his character development, which is that he gets to pick, or well, he doesn't get to pick, he gets to roll for a random backstory, which can either mean that he's a runaway slave, he could be, captured while serving on board a ship, or he could just be a ne'er-do-well running around clubbing people in the back until he gets apprehended by the authorities. So these backstories are kind of amazing because they really flesh out the character of this guy, which is well and good because unlike, say, for example, a dwarf slayer, which regularly occurs in Warhammer Army books, and therefore has lots of lore already, nobody really knows what a pit fighter is about in the Warhammer world until you sort of refer to this, and you kind of realize that there is quite an interesting backstory waiting for you if you choose to play this character. And I guess you could choose, instead of randomly rolling for it. But yeah, it's really up to you to take on this particular aspect of character building if you choose to. The other thing that's really cool about him is that he gets to start off the game with a bit of debt because he is a runaway pit fighter, right? Meaning he's kind of not doing his job. So he's either evaded his captors and he's gone on to try to find it, make his way in the world elsewhere. But the downside is that he does need to pay his debt because people are after him and he's a fugitive on the run. So there are results on random uneventful table days, when essentially what happens is he gets caught by his captors and forced to pay some of his debt back, which is a little bit painful, especially since, in Warhammer Quest, money is kind of everything. It's tied to how you level up your character, it's tied to the gear that you buy, it's tied to also the idea that you need to spend money to upgrade all of your little armor bits all over your body, like I just mentioned. So yeah, it's a tough life being a pit fighter, but it's very rewarding because my goodness, boy, can this guy hits like a ton of bricks. It's a bit of a glass cannon in the best sense of the word, but yes, he takes a lot of damage, but on the upshot, he also starts with something called a Heal It Potion, which I kid you not, must be the best starting item in the game. Because Heal It Potions, in a game where, most of the characters already don't start with some form of healing, the exception being, like, say, the elf or the wizard, who are absolutely essential to heal their fellows. The Heal It Potion is kind of amazing. He gets to use it to restore a d6 wounds. Basically the number of wounds on the roll of a die, 1 to 6 wounds every turn. But then, if he rolls, a 1, the potion runs out. That means he can keep drinking it until he rolls a 1. That's fantastic. Potions in this game are a really important resource. Most of the time, you gauge your chances of survival around whether or not you've got a potion to bail you out of a tough situation. Those minotaurs, huh? Yeah. You really, really need potions. And the fact that you've got a potion that you can reliably use until you roll a 1 is kind of insane. You can also use it on your friends, but then it runs out on a 1 or a 2. In other words, on a 3 or more, you can keep on going with it. Still good. Still excellent. I mean, it's hard to find anything wrong with the Heal It Potion. And in the vanilla version of the rules, if you do ever roll a 1 and lose your Heal It Potion, you can buy it back for 50 gold. 50 gold! That's nothing. It's the equivalent of walking into a healing, into like a healer's and walking out with a potion for maybe the cost of a slice of pizza. 50 gold is nothing in this game, right? Like, to put it in context, killing an orc gives you practically that. So 50 gold is not something to lose any sleep over. And you can carry multiples of them, meaning you can keep healing yourself. I cannot like go on too much about this because I love this item so much. And frankly, with how hard Warhammer Quest is, you're probably gonna need it. So, you know, all of that power and all of that cheese kind of gets used to help your friends along anyway. So I don't think many people are going to complain. Maybe complain a little bit about how much damage he puts out, but that's fine. You know, in my Warhammer Quest games, we've got an in-house rule where we share the money that we acquire anyway. Very very communist of us in that sense, but it does take away issues like who's earning more money, who's earning less money, who's hogging all the kills. These are not things that you really want to concern yourself over. After all, people are fighting tooth and nail. The question of who makes best use of a magic item, we want to avoid that as well. So we just go ahead and distribute it according to who can equip it. And because we're adults, we can come together and decide on who is best placed to make use of a particular kind of item. Pit fighters, man. Pit fighters are amazing. You want this guy following you in your adventures because yes, he's an absolute damage dealing monster, but on the flip side, he could, really hold his own with his potion, and he needs basically support as well because he's not infallible. His armor doesn't protect him that much. Just a really cool character to have around. Plus a really unique backstory, right? He's not a barbarian, dwarf, elf, or wizard in any. He's not a clone or a palette swap in any way. He's quite the unique character, and he's wonderful to have around when things get bad and minotaurs are everywhere. So yeah. Anyway, for the silver that I've been putting on, I've been using my usual Vallejo Model Air, best silver ever, best silver in the business, I feel. And this I am going to put on everything that is going to be silver, with the exception of these studs, because I think these studs, if I put silver on them now, and then I slap on my contrast colors to over that, I don't think I'm going to be able to see the silver. So we'll hold it off to a little bit later. Probably going to keep the paint job neater and cleaner if we save that for later. He's also got this like little section on his back where the two straps cross. We can go ahead and pick it out in silver because that's easy enough to avoid. And when you look at this guy, he's actually not wearing many colors, so I can go ahead and spend a little bit more time on getting these to look nice and neat. Yeah, so he's got steel toe caps, but oddly enough, he looks like he's wearing like the Warhammer Quest equivalent of Crocs. Yeah, kind of unique actually, and he's dressed, I guess, in a style that I cannot imagine um, being common in any human civilization in the Warhammer world. Nobody in Nestalia dresses like that. That's more like Renaissance Italy. Nobody in the Empire does. That's more or less Renaissance Germany. And nobody from Norska, where you've got sort of Viking looking chaps. Nobody quite dresses like this guy. So it leads me to think that this kind of follows Roman gladiator rules, where basically the garb of a gladiator or a pit fighter would be some kind of, it would be an emulation for one of the enemies of humanity. So this guy might just be, some empire nobleman's imagining of what a chaos marauder looks like. For example, that's probably the best analog that I can think of. Just somebody really spiky and dangerous and covered with blades and all sorts of evil-minded stuff. Very cool miniature. He's also got a scrunchie. I don't know how else to describe that, but that thing that's holding his top knot up kind of looks like a scrunchie to me, which is all kinds of hilarious if you think about it. Yeah, so I'm gonna let the flesh dry a little bit, and I'm gonna put in a little bit more emphasis to give his shape, his body a little bit more shape. And this guy works out, right? So he looks like just a bunch of sausage links. He's so defined and so ripped that it's worthwhile spending a little bit more time defining these muscles a little bit more. It's a little bit pale though, which I think is entirely appropriate for somebody who spends most of his time indoors in dungeons or in fighting pits and arenas, not necessarily outside working the fields. So I'm okay keeping him this light skin tone. I considered making him a little bit darker, just to make him look a little bit more tough. But I don't think so. I think I'll save that skin tone for somebody who actually works, say, on the decks of a ship. There's been quite a lot of fan-made content for Warhammer Quest, and one of the character packs that you can get, unofficial of course, but still really good fun to play, is for a cutthroat pirate. Maybe I'll keep the darker skin tone for him because it's part of the world building that that guy would actually spend lots of time in the sun, whereas this pit fighter would really get to stay indoors most of the time, fighting for his life. I don't mean to imply that he's having a cushy job or anything like that. But yeah, keeping him indoors and keeping his skin relatively pale and peachy. So I have picked out some of my favorite AK light flesh, right? One of my usual go-tos for skin tones. And I'm going to mix this directly into the Guilliman Flesh and Seraphim Sepia contrast mix. And I'm going to start applying some rudimentary highlights, carefully avoiding the areas which are still slightly wet. Yep. So a little bit lighter, I think. Ooh, that may be way too much. Ooh, sorry, can you guys see? Yeah, I think I popped in a little bit too much light flesh into my flesh contrast mixture. So let's try to get that down again to a point where it's a bit more reasonable. Yeah. Okay, cool. I don't really have ratios for this. Sometimes it's a little bit for models like this, where you're kind of mixing colors into contrast to create highlights. I think you kind of need to experiment a little bit. So take a little bit, mix it up, and then put it on a part of the model that maybe wouldn't look too bad if you messed up. I mean, I put it on his butt. Considering what a big feature it is of this model, maybe that wasn't the best idea. But you know what? With a little bit of blending, I think we can go a long way to fixing a lot of issues as they occur. So I think he looks just fine now. Yeah, so I'm going to pop in a few of these highlights, being careful to avoid the pools of contrast in the recesses. That's just to save us a bit of time, and also because I'm slightly impatient to see how nicely this guy's skin turns out when I'm done with it. Sometimes you have a model where you're just excited to get paint on the surface because you're really curious to see how it will look fully painted. This is definitely one of them. Whoever sculpted this model, and I've tried to track him down, but I'm not entirely sure. If I do find it, I'll drop it into the description below because I haven't, as of recording this video, I haven't actually managed to figure out who sculpted this. But whoever did sculpt this model did an amazing job, right? This is an absolute gem of a miniature, and well worth tracking down if you are able to. Such a cool model. Lots of details, a completely unique, I guess, fashion sense or armor style, and really expressive face. Very cool. Face kind of reminds me a bit of Abaddon. I guess it's the top knot and scrunchy deal. Abaddon, as in the War Master Abaddon from 40k. Yeah, something about that combination of top knot scrunchy and just a really, really mean, bald guy face makes him look really intimidating and really unique when you compare him to the other characters. So this guy, there's no chance of mixing him up with any other warrior. He just looks amazing straight out of the box. Very, very cool. I used to own this when I was a lot younger, but of course, I got overzealous trying to convert things, and eventually he became a barbarian. Um, don't ask me why I took one of the rarest and most sought after Warhammer Quest miniatures, because this was a standalone expansion box, right? So there weren't actually that many of them produced, I can imagine. So they were actually really quite hard to come by, especially when some time had passed since the release. And then I turned it into probably the most overproduced character, which is the barbarian. I don't know why I did that. Seemed like a good idea at the time. We'll just go with that. Okay, so I think he's looking pretty good. All things considered, his flesh is looking nice and neat. It's a little bit pale, but I think that's entirely okay. We might go ahead and glaze that down with a little bit more flesh contrast medium later. Flesh contrast paint, sorry, later. But for now, I'm pretty happy with the way he's looking. Now, in case you're wondering or you missed it, the reason why I mixed Seraphim Sepia into Guilliman Flesh is because I find Guilliman Flesh on its own kind of oddly pinkish. The Seraphim Sepia adds a little bit of much needed warmth to the skin tone, and I find it just makes the models look more alive after that and more complex in a way. It's got a lot more variation in skin tone, which I really enjoy. Plus, it doesn't look like contrast paint. I think we're at the point in the hobby where contrast paints are so ubiquitous that contrast paints sometimes just look like contrast paints. So it's a bit important to make sure that you take a few extra steps to um, basically differentiate it from models which are just straight contrast paint. Sometimes it's not just enough to paint something well. Sometimes you want to paint something in a way that distinguishes it from just the basic kind of job based on what the current painting meta is. I feel like lots of people use contrast paints currently, and frankly, that has a specific look to it. So one of the things that I've done to try to make it look a little bit unique is right now, I'm not sure if you can tell, but the model is undercoated in my usual Pylox 38 matte gray white, and that basically gives me a color that differentiates the contrast tones a little bit. Plus, I use a lot of contrast mixes. The color that I'm using is essentially a bit of an off-white, so it does add a little bit of interest to the final result. It takes away a little bit of the saturation. If you've watched this series of videos from this series in the past, then you know that I'm basically repeating myself ad nauseum, simply because I'm not sure you can follow along with exactly what I'm doing if you are not, kind of aware of what this color kind of looks like. The closest analog that I would use would be Vallejo Silver Gray. I use that generally as the color that, I use it as a touch-up color essentially to clean up areas where I've gone a little bit too aggressive with highlights sometimes, as is my want. Yeah. So on to this red. So looking at the official artwork, this guy he's clearly been sculpted by someone who just watched Zardoz. That really retro sci-fi bizarre film that has like Sean Connery dressed up in a gimp suit. Or well, it's kind of worse than a gimp suit. It's more like he's dressed up in a strappy bikini, a mankini. Terrifying, absolutely terrifying. So someone clearly thought that that look was a good idea to emulate on a pit fighter, maybe because of the intimidation factor. I don't know, but yeah, there's a lot of red leather on this chap. In fact, most of his body gear is red leather, and that contrasts actually quite nicely with the silver studs and metal. And yeah, I know he's got a red leather thong. Don't mind me as I block this in on his back. It might be slightly distracting, I realize, but yeah, kind of stands out on the battlefield on the tabletop, as well as if you happen to use him in Warhammer as on the battlefield, because he's such a unique looking design. And then if you put him in this crazy bright red bikini outfit, well, there's no way you're gonna mistake this guy for anybody else. But he owns it. He looks like he's living the life, trying to work up the money to repay his debts. So he's making his way in the world. So on models like this, just a little a word about technique. I don't like doing highlighting, right? It's probably the part of painting miniatures that I enjoy the least. So what I try to do is I try to build up colors in a way that minimizes the need for highlighting later on. So that means working with translucent paints, because contrast paints, the logic is that it sinks into the recesses and it leaves the raised areas in a lighter color, a lighter version of itself, because it's not appearing at full strength on the surface of the miniature. That means, in theory, you can come back in and deepen the parts that you want, and you can just leave the bits that you don't want to, that will basically simulate a highlight by leaving them in the original color, just like that. So you see the top edge is unpainted. That kind of looks like a prototype highlight, a proto highlight, if you will. And then I go in and I darken the areas that I actually want to look shaded in, like with the full strength color, by simply applying a second coat of this stuff. And that means that you can have a model that's fairly defined. It's got highs and lows already built into the model. And you can skip the first highlight stage because, as you well know, highlighting is one of the most time-consuming parts of painting miniatures, and it's a really good reason why we never finish quite as many models or make quite as much progress as we want. It helps to have a little sneaky technique like this to basically speed up the process a little bit, so that we concentrate on the parts that we do enjoy. So, placing final highlights I find very enjoyable, right? Because it's really about choosing where exactly the that points to emphasize are. So I find that stage enjoyable. I don't find the early highlights, the first one or two highlights after you shaded your miniature. I don't find those fun to do because they cover a lot of ground. And frankly, a lot of it is just cleaning up the worst excesses of the wash where it's kind of gone where you don't want it to go. So this style of painting, in my opinion, kind of minimizes the boring first highlight even more, right? It reduces the need for highlights in general, but it really cuts down on that first highlight, the one that's just the most busy work, because you're essentially covering lots and lots and lots of ground, trying to make it look nice and neat and clean. Yeah, that nobody got time for that, right? So do it this way, and you might find yourself saving a little bit of time and having still quite a decent result. Because most contrast paints, when applied correctly, cuts to the right strength, I would say. Basically gives you your base coat as well as your first shade. And if you cut it slightly more than that, you have what is a convincing highlight on the edge of it. And then you go in to re-establish the shade, re-establish the recesses with more of the same contrast paint until you get something that reads like the full strength of the color that you're trying to paint. So anyway, that's a really wordy way of explaining it, but the end result I feel is pretty good. All right. The other thing that you can do is you can come back to the model and continue to add successive layers of contrast paint to either shade it further, or you can switch to another color entirely, and that basically gives you the option of having the model a little bit more subtly pulling in different directions color scheme wise. So for example, you could shade this with a black tone after this, which I almost certainly will, because there's so much metal on him, right? And all that's going to be shaded with Nuln Oil. So if I get a little bit of Nuln Oil around the edges of some of the larger areas of red, I find that that's going to give me a good shading boost anyway for the depth of the shadows. It's essentially creating a new color on the model by overlaying the previous layer of red. And I think that looks pretty impressive once we get that underway. I'll point it out again when the time comes. So I'm just realizing that I missed a little spot there, this loincloth. And I think that's pretty good. Okay, so a lot of this model is actually done already. It's quite nice. So, well, I'm just looking at his hair, the black areas. His shoes will be black, I imagine. So let's jump in on that now. So I'm going to grab a little bit of Black Templar. I'm carefully avoiding brown because this model has a lot of colors that can read as brown at a distance. So for example, there's a lot of flesh, and the red from afar can take on the appearance of brown. So I want something that's very significantly different. So this is one of the few times that I'm actually going to go for jet black for his hair, and jet black for the leather parts of his Crocs. Just the idea of a pit fighter wading into combat wearing Crocs is just kind of funny to me. I kind of really love that idea, that image, because this guy, he's got easily washable footwear because of all the blood that he'll be tracking through. He's going to be making a mess and he doesn't care if his shoes get dirty. And that is someone that you don't want to be messing around with. That's someone that you want to treat with the utmost respect, because holy crap, he doesn't care if he gets his shoes dirty. Happy to walk all over your corpse if he needs to. So a little bit more over here on the back. And then there's the question of what to do with the straps. I'm not sure I want to do the straps in either red or black, just because there's a lot of them. And with a model that, it's not that he doesn't have a lot of detail, it's just that there isn't a lot of variation on his surface. So it might help the model be a bit more readable if I do them in a relatively bright color. So I'm thinking maybe a light tan color, maybe Nazdreg yellow, might be a useful way to inject a bit of color to him. Perhaps. I'll have a think about that. The alternative is Rattling Grime, which would take it more towards a darker tone. Not a bad idea either, a bit more neutral, but at a glance, it might be a little bit too close to the black, so perhaps not. It's alright, have a think about it. It looks like the silver's mostly drying nicely, so we might go ahead and do some shading wash in noun oil for the metal bits. Because there's so much metal, I think I foresee myself having to do highlights for this, which is fine. We've got our silver there on the wet palette, so that's still available to us should we need it. I'm wondering about his scrunchie as well. As much as I like the idea of painting it like a scrunchie in another color, yeah, I think it might look a bit goofy. I can't bring myself to paint it in black as well, though, simply because it's not really respecting the fact that it's another material, or clearly is intended to be another material. This is such an interesting quandary. I'll probably keep it the same color as his straps, whatever I choose for it. Maybe snakebite leather, but shaded with extra layers to make it darker. Anyway, I'm going to jump in and do the haft of his weapon now, his pit flail. So for this, I am going to use... What's a good color for this? I want to keep it fairly bright and dynamic, so I'm going to use Nazdreg yellow. I might have said snakebite yellow earlier, did I? No, Nazdreg yellow is the one I'm looking for. Okay, so as you can see, when you use Nazdreg yellow neat without diluting it, keep it fairly strong. It kind of looks like a brown tone, which is really useful because visibly it's a very different brown tone from snakebite leather, which is my other go-to brown of choice for neutral areas, for natural looking wood and so on. Yeah, I think that looks pretty good actually. Yeah, I do appreciate avoiding neutral browns, as you've definitely heard me rattle about if you've watched my other videos. Mostly because I think neutral browns are a little bit overused and tend to recede on the miniature, which is fine if you intend for that area to recede. Sometimes you don't need every belt, buckle, pouch, or belt or pouch or a little bit of detail jumping out for attention for you from the viewer. But yeah, using neutral browns tends to be a waste of that particular bit of real estate on the miniature color-wise, unless you've got a really good reason for it, like wanting it to recede to not compete for attention. So there you go. That Nazdreg yellow actually looks pretty good. I'm kind of happy with that. I'm still eyeing up those straps and trying to figure out what I want to do with them. Let's keep thinking. I'm going to revisit the flesh a little bit because I think we can go lighter still, only because this model is, his main feature. When you look at a model in general, you want to choose one or two main features about the model's surface to be, your main character when you address painting it. So if a model is mostly flesh covered, or flesh covered. If a model is mostly has a lot of flesh showing, you probably want to make that a major feature of the model. So it's worthwhile spending a little bit more time on that. Often our eyes will be brought, to whichever part of the model is kind of most important to determining the overall look of the miniature. And we can really reinforce that idea by putting in a few extra highlights or a little bit more visual flair. And then that leads the eye away from things which are maybe a little less fully rendered, while still not compromising the look of the miniature too much, right? So that really allows us to speed up our painting game. Um, yeah, that really helps to make the model pop without taking like hours and hours and hours to paint a model. Which it's possible, right? It's very possible if you highlight every little detail to spend days on a miniature. Been there, done that. I used to do that when I was painting for Golden Demon. Not not such a big fan of that anymore. I find this kind of painting a lot more pleasurable and a lot more chill. Hence, Chill Hammer. Yeah, I think it's looking good. The Zardos look is definitely there. It's a horror show, I assure you. If you want to sear the image into your retina, you can go make a Google search for Zardos, Zardos, Zardoz. Um, that's something that you won't forget anytime soon. I promise you. Okay, I see that I'm going to need to do a little bit of a touch up on his straps, on his fist spike, because I have gone ahead and painted those silver, which of course they aren't, right? So those are these ones over here. So I am going to use silver gray, like I mentioned, Vallejo silver gray, which is a very close match for the undercoat that I used. I'm gonna pop a little bit over here if it lets me. Woo! Okay, a lot more volunteered than I expected. So that's one of the downsides of dropper bottles, right? Like when they work, they're great, but they do clog quite a bit. And when they clog, sometimes they come out with a vengeance, right? It's like there are times when nobody will answer the door, and then there are times when everybody is just there clamoring to get at you. So that's a bit of a downside, but it's not a big deal. Generally speaking, I think dropper bottles are amazing. I have transferred all of my Games Workshop paints into dropper bottles, and not only is it less like liable to dry out and basically clog. Well, not clog, it certainly clogs, but not only is it less liable to dry out and become unusable, mixing paints is also a lot easier when you can decide if you want one drop of this and two drops of that. And mixing all these mixes is a lot easier to do. So all these are really, really good for your painting, like efficiency and speed. But the downside is that every now and then it goes like that. It's bad news. But what do you do? Right? Nothing's perfect. So, should Chess Eagle be gold? I think so. Chess Dragon, actually. It's a tiny little dragon. Yeah, Chess Dragon should definitely be gold. Or should it? I kind of like the monochromatic look. Can I have used a gold kind of facsimile with the Nazdreg yellow? Just for reference, my usual way to paint gold is to use a mix of contrast Nazdreg yellow with again Seraphim Sepia, and I apply this over a silver base coat. So maybe I won't do that today. Maybe we'll keep it. Maybe we'll keep him as far from the silver and gold, the gold spectrum as much as possible. I like the idea that he dresses in flashy but very practical gear, because this is in fact a professional killer. His life does actually depend on the way he performs. And yes, he needs to kill in an entertaining way, but maybe I like the idea that underneath all that flash and pomp and circumstance, this guy actually knows what he's doing. It's not his first day on the job. He's not an intern. He's actually gotten to where he is now, climbing over the corpses of many unfortunate opponents. and he is an excellent guy to have on your side in a dungeon. So long as he's on your side. So maybe let him have the magic items that he wants from the stash. To be fair though, I'm not sure what magic items this guy can actually use. When I think about it, so much of his equipment allotment is used up by his unique gear, right? So you always want the fist spike and the, well, maybe not so much the pit flail as you level up. But the fist spike always stays good, right? Because +2 attacks is always good in any context. You kind of always want +2 attacks, right? You get to claw your way through so many more enemies with +2 attacks. But yeah, so he might be loath to give up his equipment for magic items, even for magic items, unless you come across a real stonker, right? But when it comes down to it, I think there are a lot of items that he doesn't get to use as well, so that may be a bit of a challenge. Huh. Yeah. One of the best things about this guy, however, is the fact that when he levels up, he can essentially choose which stat to put his upgrades into, kind of like Diablo 2, right? Where you know your necromancer, for example, could pile points into the only skill that mattered, which was corpse explosion, or one of your summoning skills, I guess, if you really must tar pit your opponents. But corpse explosion was where it's at, right? Maybe a bone spear or two to kind of like create the first corpse, and then corpse explosion to corpse explode them into the, well, into the next world. But yeah, I actually really like the way this monochromatic look is going. I'm glad it didn't do the gold on the chest, because I think maybe it's painting too many Space Marines. Like when I see a chest eagle, I'm like, okay, cool, it's gonna be a chest eagle, it's gonna be gold, right? Whatever the color is. But now that I look at it, I really like the look of the silver, because I think he looks more interesting this way. It's what happens, when we tend to paint by, I think we tend to paint on autopilot, but sometimes making a few key decisions can make a big difference to the look of a model, and we shouldn't shy away from ideas, and we should try to experiment with these things, just in case we hit upon a real like home run. And it could be a subtle thing, right? Because I'm sure the vast majority of people probably wouldn't pay too much attention to the idea that his chest thing is not in gold. Um, or indeed, a lot of people might actually prefer it in gold. That's your prerogative. But I'm actually really enjoying this. I can't call this guy monochromatic, but I'm really enjoying the idea that there is a bit of reserve in the color palette for somebody who's already looking so ostentatious. So long as the model is readable, you don't necessarily need to feel compelled to use many colors. In fact, using a limited palette can be visually more compelling, because it channels your eyes to where it needs to go. Also, game wise, it really conveys the idea that um, every piece of armor on this guy is unique, but they are ultimately still part of a matching set. The pit armor is unique to this character, and therefore maybe it doesn't need to look like a real hodgepodge mess of parts. I think maybe I'm just justifying my use of silver and giving myself a real pat on the back. Slightly more noun oil. By the way, I'm using the slightly older, well, not the slightly older, the original noun oil, the one that came in a pot with a lot more black pigment mixed in. If you get the newer noun oil, you'll find that it's a lot weaker, pigment wise. It's not necessarily a downgrade, more of a side grade, usable for different roles. But for me, because I want my noun oil to actually stain slightly when I apply it to silver parts to make them a little bit more realistic and a bit more weathered looking. I would recommend, if you're buying the new noun oil, to just drop a little bit of Black Legion in there. I find Black Legion works particularly good. Black Templar in low concentrations has a tendency to look slightly blue, so not ideal. Whereas Black Legion gives you a sort of really neutral black, which complements the noun oil color perfectly. So what you're seeing me do now is to add a little bit more definition along the fist spike blade. I'll definitely be coming in to apply a highlight along the edge because I just want this to look as sharp and as dangerous as possible. Now that I've taken the step to avoid gold for details and trim, I think I need to make the silver, I need to justify the use of this much silver by making sure that it's as readable as possible. So definitely going to be applying some highlights on the edges. Cool, I think he's looking pretty good. At this point, his scrunchie is really bothering me. As well as his straps. I'm gonna do his scrunchie in black. I don't think I could countenance that being another color. It would just be too weird. So fine, we're gonna go in and we're gonna do it in black. Maybe he's knotted his hair. Maybe that's not actually a scrunchie. I don't know, or he's deliberately picked a color of scrunchie that's dark enough to blend in with his real hair, and so people won't make fun of him for being, you know, born in the 90s, as he is. Yeah, that's fine. While we're here, might as well do his eyes. But you know what? I'm going to switch to a better brush because I have messed up eyes before on camera. Trust me, guys, it's a little bit harder when you're trying to do it perfectly first time. But yeah, ooh, that's a bit bloopy, but I think that's fine. Ooh, that's way too much eye. So despite all I said, a bit too much eye. But I will come in and I will fix that later when it's fully dry. Sometimes it's best to just take it slow and not be impatient with getting these things right. Okay, cool. So I realized I missed a little spot in the back of his knee. That little patch of color should ideally be flesh tone. There we go. And as you can see, I'm just continually refining the various like recesses within his skin. So you can just keep going back and forth on this, right? Like applying the highlights and applying careful targeted shading to the recesses. And that over time gives you a model that looks increasingly highlighted. Or at least it looks like a lot of work has been put into it, which I think is kind of the idea. You get quite a bit of bang for your buck with this approach. His eyes are bothering me, but I think we'll look away. We'll force ourselves to look away for a little while we consider what to do with his straps. I might just keep the color palette small and go ahead and do those in Nazdreg yellow as well. Nazdreg yellow, like I mentioned, when used in concentration, actually looks more brown than yellow. So I think that works. Oops. It works for our purposes. So let's grab that, apply it over here. Visually, that links it to the wood of the haft of the pit flail, so it doesn't come across as too distracting, despite the fact that Nazdreg yellow is actually quite a bright color. Plus, it still reads as something that could naturally be interpreted as leather without adding an additional color to be distracting, so I think that's pretty good. I swear, sometimes I make up this shit on the fly, and I hope you guys are okay with that. Sometimes I just share these things, and when I listen to myself later, I go like, whoa, what did I just say? I mean, depending on how charitable you were being, you could either see it as, you know, just being kind of profound, or it could be just the biggest load of hogwash you've ever heard, and that's fine, so long as I don't bore you too much, I guess. And I hope this is useful for someone. Okay, so the time has come to fix his eyeshadow, his unintentional eyeshadow. Yeah, so this is just the previous highlight mix. Again, this is one of those really, this is one of a like a multitude of reasons why you want to have a wet palette, right? Because it keeps the open time available to you for all the paints that you've mixed in the like up until this point. And another one of those reasons why I like to do these videos all in one sitting, because honestly, it gives me time to revisit these colors as needed. Um, as you well know, these models are not going to be, absolute perfection. They're just going to be a presentable tabletop standard. Maybe a little bit of highlights to sort of like cover up some of the weaker areas of our work, but nothing like too out of the ordinary. I just want it to look presentable on the tabletop. For now, that's good enough. Because yeah, these videos really shouldn't be allowed to go on and on and on and on. Although I must say, I'm absolutely trying my darndest to keep going. There are times when I'm just so tempted to, keep like shading and highlighting ad nauseum, and then I remember that I shouldn't be boring my audience. But one day we'll have a video where we come in, and then we kind of address all the little niggling doubts I have with various aspects of the color scheme, and hopefully fix a lot of these little issues along the way. Let me know if that's something that you'd be keen to watch as we revisit our greatest hits, so to speak. So I'm very carefully coming in with silver to address all the little bits of studs and details, as well as to clean up some of the metal areas. Sometimes it can be a little bit hard to work out what is a stud and what isn't. I'm not referring to this guy. This guy is most assuredly a stud. But what I mean is the little bits of detail on his back. Oh, right. So that's another challenge with painting these models sometimes, right? Like for Warhammer Quest in particular, where the models didn't see a lot of use in the main range Warhammer games, you very rarely got a chance to see these models from the back in the published material. So sometimes you had to make up details as you go along. Like for example, you had to try to work out what was going on with this section of his belt at the back. I think those are buckles, so I will leave them as such, not do them in silver. So you usually have a really good look from White Dwarf magazine, or even the cover art, or the back of the box painted model, which is usually a lot easier because frankly the cover art would differ a little bit from the model in the execution by the sculptor. So sometimes it helps to refer to these, but for the back you were kind of on your own. You weren't entirely sure how they would look. When I first saw this miniature like in the flesh, I was amazed that they actually sculpted like a leather thong on him. It looked wildly uncomfortable, but such is the life of a pit fighter sometimes. You get familiar with discomfort, and you get good at fixing things your own way with your very special set of skills. So refining the point on his fist spike. Again, if I decide this is a little bit overzealous, I might come back in to clean it up. But I don't think it's too bad at this point. Another thing to consider for this miniature is to maybe add some scarification all over his body. Scarification. Just to give him that little bit more of an interesting skin tone. But for now, I think I'm okay with him looking nice and defined and clean. Maybe he's a pit fighter at the start of his career. Maybe he hasn't quite acquired scarification. So a little bit more of this on the various bits and bobs and rondelles and spikes grafted onto his armor. And I think we're doing pretty good with his look. I feel. What do you guys think? I think he's looking quite nice. Again, I'm amazed at how much of a difference leaving his chest thingy, his little dragon friend, in silver has made. I do not regret my choice at all. Okay, so I think other than doing his eyes, I might want to spend a little bit of time highlighting his hair because again his hair is enormous and it's extremely Abaddon-like. Therefore I feel an immediate affinity. I played a lot of Chaos Space Marines for 40k, and therefore it might be that Horus had more than one clone son. It's just one of them went to the Warhammer world to become a pit fighter. So I'm gonna go in and let's see. That's this gigantic puddle, Black Templar to form a workable grey, and we're gonna maybe put a few streaks on this just to give his hair a bit of definition. Doesn't really need too much because I think I want to keep it overall fairly dark. I find over highlighting black is one of those mistakes that people tend to make quite a bit. But you know the drill, right? Like if you over highlight something, just cut back into the highlight with that contrast paint that you used. So if you use Black Templar for this, cut back in with Black Templar. And because Black Templar, well, because contrast paints in general are translucent, it has the effect of cutting back in with a glaze, right? So you get to do it in a bit more of a more subtle and feathered way, rather than leaving a hard line. If, for example, you try cutting back in with just pure black paint, purely opaque black paint, cutting in will be a lot less effective. Or rather, it might be too effective to the point that the model starts to look really stark and hard-edged, when really what you want is to sort of gently have those areas flow into each other visually. I think that looks pretty good. And I'm starting to talk like Gordon Ramsay for some reason. I have no idea why or where it came from, but it works. Okay, so let's go on to doing his base. As usual, when I've hit a sort of like mental... Oh wait, you know what? I just missed one stud. This boy has so many studs. Don't mind me concentrating. Sorry for the lack of audio as I sort this out. I am actually holding my breath when I paint tiny little pyramidal freaking spikes on this man's thong. So please forgive me if some concentration is required so that he doesn't have a cyborg butt from my spilling silver onto his perfectly beautiful baby's bottom skin. Emphasis on the bottom. So yeah, Pit Fighters. Absolutely amazing addition to Warhammer Quest. Added a lot of complexity and uniqueness to the game, and very much an entertaining character to bring into battle. A really reliable fighter, a crap ton of damage output, customizable stats that you could use to shape this guy into a real combat monster, or spread a little bit more evenly around to make him a bit more well-rounded. Just generally a fantastic model to have. Plus a really unique looking miniature, and definitely somebody that kind of fit into the role of something similar to the Barbarian. But no, he's his own special boy. Great in a fight. You could bring him along almost in lieu of a wizard if you wanted healing. What am I doing? I should be doing this and pissing everyone off. Yeah, but yeah, really great to have a really reliable healer, really reliable fighter, lots of damage dealing. Looks after himself because of his healing, which is nice. So he's just not there in need of rescue all the time. Takes a crap ton of damage, but also deals out a crap ton of damage. So just no matter what happens, something interesting is always happening to the pit fighter. Plus, I believe he was one of the last few characters to be released into the world, into the Warhammer world, and as a result, I think he's held to be one of the most powerful characters in the roster. Certainly one of the most interesting, but also one of the most effective. And I think it's gotten to the point where some people have actually taken it upon themselves to nerf it slightly. So there are fan edits to the rules. You might want to look those up, just in case it feels like sometimes your pit fighter's running away with combats a little bit and making things a little bit too easy. Myself, maybe it might be true, but it's mostly about the bruised egos of other characters, of other players. It's less about whether or not you need somebody like this on your side, because hey, it's Warhammer Quest. You 100% do. Everything's so lethal that when D3 Minotaurs start to appear, you'd be glad that you brought the pit fighter along, because he will nail them with his pit flail. At least until he rolls a 1 and clubs himself right in the face. But you know what? When that happens, he's got the heal it potion. So yeah, he's got his bases covered. What a good boy. Okay. I think his pupils are a little bit insane, so I might need to fix that a little bit. Let me try to get the center of that pupil. Hey guys, that's something to learn. It's not easy to cut into a pupil using contrast paint, so maybe don't try that. Let's go for a bit of black. My bottle's a little bit clogged, so I'm gonna just get some out. Any black will do. And I need to fix that weird little scar under his eye. Or maybe I don't, maybe I lean into it and just emphasize it with a highlight on the edge. Neaten it up slightly. Grab some black. You know what? I think it looks fine. Huh. In fact, let's do something completely different. Let's add to that scar. Above. There we go. Now he looks like he's seen some fighting. Those bizarre times when I've decided not to fix a problem, but to lean the other way entirely. Alright, so let's just do the edge of the base. Let's grab some of my usual base edge color, which is hiding from me, of course. Dude, it's brown leather from Scale Color, and this is a really nice scorch brown-ish Rhinox Heidi kind of color that goes on really nice and smooth and dries really matte, and is fairly hard wearing as well, which is nice. Hate it when your bases get chipped around the edges from handling. This is reasonably tough and hard wearing, so it doesn't happen too often. And even if you do, it's fairly easy to touch up. It's not a big deal, but yeah, I like the idea that this is on the edge of my bases. And nice and matte, so it's not too distracting from the main focus, which should be the miniature himself. Right, okay, so that's our boy. This is the pit fighter. Little things that I would change and tweak, maybe clean up his eyes a little bit, decide whether I want to add a few more scars to him. But I think he looks pretty good. Not perfect by any means, but hey, who is in the Warhammer Quest and the Warhammer world? Okay guys, woo! He's a live one. Alright guys, have a good one. Cheers, keep painting. Join me for the next one. Like, comment, subscribe, all the good stuff. I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.